I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. Another sunny day in the Okanagan. Not sure why the background's all fuzzy again. Maybe Rom will fix that up there, make that background a little clearer. But on the phone with me is Ian Burns, all the way out there from Ottawa. How you doing today, Ian?
I'm alright, mate. Very, very snowy here. All the schools, or many of the schools closed. Looks a little crazy out there.
The roads are clear here in the valley bottom for sure, and it's a beautiful day in the Okanagan. So winning in Kelowna. There you go. Um, more than 100 Canadian business leaders call for the end of prorogation of Parliament. That's a Globe and Mail opinion piece from Andrew Coyne, who also sits on a CBC panel. Um, more and more people are starting to call for this, that we need to put our government and our Parliament back into play. And then that court case is being held today. The two Nova Scotia men are asking the federal court to declare the current suspension of the Parliament illegal because there's no reasonable justification for hitting pause. And that's that next slide there. Thoughts on that, Ian, where this court case is going to go? That court case is going on for the next 2 days.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I mean, uh, the Liberals are adamant, absolutely adamant that it's completely legal. It's the prerogative of the Prime Minister using sort of the royal powers, which are invested in Parliament. Theoretically, it is pretty legit, and I haven't heard many serious people that have opposed it, to be honest. But I mean, these two people, they're not just two randomers. These are they're lawyers. They're both quite experienced lawyers, and they're also being supported by a lot of other lawyers, including obviously the BC Civil Liberties Association. I don't know. I mean, their argument is that it would represent a kind of tyranny. Like we would in effect be living in a tyranny if this was given the green light by the federal court. That it would mean that the government could basically just suspend Parliament whenever it felt like it, because the only real rule is that it should sit at least once every 12 months. I mean, you can see how that could be pretty crazy. You couldn't, if that was the only rule and that was endorsed by the court, then you could have Parliament open for a very short period of time and just prorogue it, like, and have it once a year, almost like the old-fashioned medieval times in England, where they used to have these like Parliament was actually quite a rare thing. So I don't know. It's an intriguing one. I mean, this is one for like the complete legal nerds to figure out, isn't it? They're gonna have to read tens of thousands of words going back probably centuries to actually figure out the answer to this question. So, I mean, I'm going to be very interested in the answer anyway, but my suspicion is that it'll be given the green light.
Yeah, I mean, common sense says that it shouldn't be because right now Canada's sitting in one of the worst situations economically, and we don't have Parliament sitting, and we don't have a clear leader. So,
Yeah, but that's the nature of the political system. So I suppose, I mean, the question that should follow, maybe, if people are as upset as they seem to be, the question that should naturally follow is, do we need to modify the Canadian Constitution now? So if, as expected, the federal court says, "Yep, this was legal, nothing we can do about it. Sorry, fellas," and then Parliament remains prorogued until March 24th, isn't it? If that does happen, are we then going to have like a constitutional convention or something where people gather around and say, "Okay, this prorogation thing," because whichever party is not in power despises prorogation and talks about how horrible it is. Justin Trudeau did that himself and then went ahead and prorogued Parliament in very controversial circumstances, not just this time, but during another scandal that he was mired in. So, I mean, has the time now come to have that conversation? You know, is Pierre Poilievre going to say, "All right, we need to modify the constitution now. We need to get serious"? My suspicion is no, because if Pierre Poilievre becomes prime minister, he's going to want to prorogue Parliament himself, and so it just goes on and on and on.
so the NDP candidates told to expect an election as early as March 10th in an internal memo that went out. I mean, that's every day you have to check the scorecard to see where Jagmeet Singh is on that bingo card.
Yeah, that would mean. I mean, I assume that would mean that they would have to terminate the prorogation early, couple of weeks early and then immediately pass a bill or something like that to precipitate an election, because it's supposed to be a fixed date, isn't it? It's supposed to be in October.
Well, he might be saying that it's not a vote of no confidence. He might be thinking there because that's the day they name the leader, and that leader may call an election on March 10th.
Well, March 9 is when the leader's named, but I'm saying
Right.
because of there's a fixed term act currently in law on the books in Parliament that states that there has to be an election on a fixed date for each Parliament, and this one is in October of this year. So to modify that, to bring about an election, usually that would mean you'd have to put in a really quick one-line bill. So that would mean returning Parliament. Somebody would write the bill, and then it would have to be, rushed through Parliament. So
Yeah.
that would be quite interesting, because in that scenario, I mean, the Conservatives have been chomping at the bit for a very long time for an election, but would they give presumably Mark Carney what he wanted there, or would they try and humiliate him and say, no, no, we're not going to accede to this request?
I,
That would be quite interesting.
yeah, I don't think that would go well with Canadians, like to do that.
Well, you wouldn't think that the prorogation of Parliament to have an internal leadership battle and a squabble within the Liberal Party would go down with Canadians, and yet, if these polls are to be believed, the Liberals are now as popular as they've been in like 18 months, and they're on in the ascendancy. So I don't know. I don't know, like, what do Canadians actually really think about this? I don't know. If those polls are even a little bit accurate, then I think our assumptions maybe aren't correct.
Yeah, I mean, the mood that I get out there is that most people want uh, an election. But we had we had Mark Carney in Kelowna yesterday, and this video here is it's kind of like discusses two topics at once. This is our video that that one account keeps taking. They took our video and played it. And they get to play it on Instagram and stuff like that, where we don't, and they get to use our work. And so we're going to play this clip from them, from them, and it just talks about Bill C-18. I mean, we're talking about Bill C-18, but here's Mark Carney and what they were trying to highlight in that speech yesterday in Kelowna.
Something that my government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
So he said that he would invoke the emergency powers, and he also said you can go on KelownaNow.com. You can see the full speech that he gave here in Kelowna, and then we did get a chance to ask him a couple questions. Although we tried to get an answer from him on Bill C-18, and he avoided that question and said he had to get to the airport, and he would not answer that question. Bill C-18 still stops media outlets in Canada from putting their news on Meta's platforms, that's Facebook and Instagram, but other people can take our content like this and put it on the platforms, which is disheartening in itself.
Indeed, and I mean, particularly Elon Musk's platform there, X, is set up to financially reward people that do that, and X is just absolutely jam-packed with ripped videos from all kinds of news companies, just downloaded and posted by random anonymous accounts, or just like agitprop accounts, who then get like millions and millions of views, and consequently tens of thousands of dollars a month in some cases, which is just, from a copyright perspective, I find that to be really strange. But certainly this is the environment that we live in Canada in particular, because of the C-18 fiasco and the removal of a lot of news. Because obviously news has been removed from Facebook and Instagram. In Canada, we just can't post, or journalists have been removed. We can't post it. Other people can post it and make money from it or get attention from it, but we can't from our own work. And then X, since Elon Musk took over Twitter and called it X, he fiddled with the algorithm and seriously punished news organizations, and particularly news organizations that post links. So every time you post a link to a story as like CNN or whatever, you just get absolutely sort of massacred by the algorithm. And then some chancer in like, I don't know, Indonesia or somewhere like that, who's just like running a business off his laptop, he just rips that story off CNN, posts the video, and gets 10 million views or something like that. It's a completely like poisoned, diseased system that we inhabit, and that's certainly been made worse by C18. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But as for Kanye here and his appearance, he's already in trouble because he said during this 20-minute sort of chin wag in Kelowna, he said in America they have a drugs crisis, and in Canada it's a drugs challenge. He said they've got a crisis in America and it's a challenge here. I mean, a very peculiar thing to say in British Columbia. I would submit, and he's already catching a bit of flack for that. And then yeah, this is the other one that he's being called out for, this emergency powers statement. So like I said yesterday, he's got quite a lot of gaffes in him. He has gaffes up his sleeve. And Holly Dawn said that to you the other day, didn't you? Didn't she? She said he's not ready for the big time yet. Sort of confirms that suspicion, I think, when he makes these errors, I think.
And if you go and watch that speech, there's a couple of things that I would ask people to note. It's what he doesn't say that's more important than what he does say. He said, things like, Donald Trump is using, like, and Pierre Poilievre are using slogans, like 3-word slogans, like Pierre's is axe the tax and Donald Trump's is drill, baby, drill. And he said what he's going to do is build, baby, build. And he talked about building these. He'll use the Emergencies Act to build these projects that'll go across Canada. Doesn't say anything about oil and gas, though, and that's been absent in much of his conversation. So I think much of what he's talking about is, and there's a few things, is that he's building green type energy projects as opposed to really green lighting a lot of the pipelines. Because why doesn't he say that we need a pipeline that goes across Canada?
Well, I would say from my perspective, he's living up to his reputation and what he's devoted a lot of his career to, at least on the political side. And he's he's all about this green transformation, green revolution, whatever you want to call it. That's like his brand. That's his political brand, I would say. So I don't think that's a surprise. And certainly, like when the scrutiny starts to arrive for Carney, I say when, I mean if, as is suspected, he becomes the leader and the prime minister. When the scrutiny comes along, I think more people are going to be aware of that he really is. He's just a true believer. He really, really believes in all of that, all of the green stuff. There's a reason he met Greta Thunberg. I think a lot of people met Greta Thunberg and people like that for opportunistic reasons. I don't think they really liked her or believed what she said or anything like that. But I think Mark Carney actually does believe this, and he's devoted a lot of time to it. So yeah, I mean that tallies. Him avoiding or not mentioning oil and gas, that tallies with me because he doesn't like oil and gas because oil and gas emits CO2, and he buys into the whole argument that that's going to be destructive and an existential crisis for the world.
Yeah, and if you go the next one here, if you go to his website, there's only one tab there. It's about policy and it's about climate. And here's this National Post article. Carney says he'll dump the consumer carbon tax because it said per conversations he's had, he said it's made divisive by Pierre Poilievre. But he'll charge a carbon border adjustment tariff, and that's on that platform thing too. And that's where he talked about charging steel for a carbon, and then also he's going to charge a carbon tax, basically a carbon tax or tariff on imports. So, like here's Trump talking about tariffs and taxes, and everybody's getting angry. And here's Carney doing the same thing, talking about putting tariffs on imports that he believes from any country that doesn't have a carbon tax. So he's going to just add a carbon tax to their products. And who's that hurt? The consumer.
Yeah, well, not just the consumer, but I would say on a more sort of macro. From a macro perspective, it hurts Canada as well, doesn't it? It makes it less competitive as an economy, I think many people would say. But I mean, it's an interesting approach to take, particularly given who's in charge in the White House right now, with whom we do most of our business. It's a little bit It's a little bit sketchy, that, isn't it? And certainly then other countries around the world that don't have carbon taxes, that don't believe in this kind of thing, like as we've said many times, the majority of the planet, they're also not going to really like this, are they? When they do business in Canada, they're not going to like the imposition of a carbon tax. So it's interesting. I mean, it seems like Mark Carney's philosophy is, it seems to be a blast from the past. It seems to be from sort of 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and the rest of the world is not really into that anymore. Has moved on from that, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if, let's just imagine for a second that he remains the prime minister for 4 years, that he actually wins the election. It'd be very interesting to see what difference he can make in the world, whether he can kind of bring the world back 15 years to that kind of like, the Kyoto Agreement and the Paris Agreement and all that, when the whole world was really interested in environmentalism and bringing down CO2 emissions and all that. It'd be interesting if he could do that. I suppose that's probably what he pictures for himself, actually, as being a kind of a leader on environmentalism when everyone else has stopped, and that he's going to kind of wave the flag and resurrect those policies. But I don't know. I don't know if does Canada have that kind of heft, do you think? I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to watch if that is
Anyway,
what happens.
I'd go back and watch that video on Kelowna Now of his speech. Definitely a lot of appeal to people's basic instinct to rally around the flag, and he's used that moment, and that's been accused of a lot in the media, that the Liberals are actually trying to irritate this tariff situation because it's working for them. It's actually giving them some support, so they're definitely rallying around it.
That's what the NDP memo said, as well as that warning about an early election. They said the Liberals that's why the Liberals are confident, because they're using that as a kind of they're using that as a tool to win the election.
This is their moment. Then we move it on to Freeland, another one of the Liberal leadership candidates that's really having a tough time out there. But she highlighted, though, I got the email from her this morning. It doesn't even say Dear Jim this morning. It's another $125,000 due on Monday.
Wow. And is she begging there? Is this a begging email?
It is.
That's a little bit odd, isn't it, Christy? You think she's packing some wealth, I imagine. Why does she not pay for it herself?
Well, because likely she knows that she's not going to get any benefit from it. She's literally fundraising for Mark Carney, I would say.
Well, that might well be the effect, yeah.
Because all the money goes to the Liberal coffers. It doesn't, like when a candidate loses, it doesn't go back to the candidate for their leadership or for them running for MP. It just goes into the general coffers, and the Liberal Party has said that's because it's for them. It's the cost of running this Liberal leadership race, so that the $325,000 they take from you, it's if you add that up by 5 candidates, that's a few bucks. It's like 1.5 million. They say that's what they need to run this Liberal leadership race, which is an internet poll, really. They must be. I mean, they're used to doing those contracts where they're paying somebody for $60 million for an app. So maybe that is the going price for having an internet poll.
They're having a few debates, aren't they? Like English and French debates. I mean, that's presumably that will be quite expensive, but I don't know if it'll be 1.5 million.
Yeah. And then the next image is a photo of the Kelowna gathering there, and then Kelowna Now's Nick there in front and center there with the camera set up. If you put that image up there.
Got his fancy hat on.
Yeah, he's got his fancy hat on. There you go. That's Nick from Kelowna Now. And then our own city councilor, Max Dehart there, because it was held at the Ramada there. She's one of the people that organizes events at the Ramada, so she was there organizing the event.
There were a few familiar faces there, weren't there? One of the candidates in the recent provincial election was there as well, whose name I can't remember, from the water board. You could spot her there in the crowd.
And then there's another image here. We're just showing you some of the meetings. This is one from Mark Carney event. This was not in Kelowna. This was a different event. And then Chrystia Freeland, she's on her X account. She has this. She met up with a bunch of young people there. They don't even look like they're old enough to vote, these young people. But again, I guess in the Liberal leadership race, you only have to be 14, isn't it?
Yep.
There you go.
If anything, they're past it. This lot, they're old by Liberal standards.
There you go. And then Liberal leadership candidate Karina Gold. We don't hear much from her. She doesn't get a lot of press either. She promises to open up a path to basic personal income. She's the only millennial in the race.
I mean, does millennial actually mean anything anymore? She's like nearly 40, isn't she? It's these generational terms are sort of bit weird now. But
And then
yeah,
liberals have
You go
lost the
ahead.
young people too. I mean, I think they had them when they were doing these handouts, but I think a lot of them now are just like, okay, that didn't really work out, right?
Well, they had them with Trudeau in 2015, and then
Yeah.
they kind of lost them because they lost them with it became most pronounced when Pierre Poilievre became the leader of the Tories, and he started going on his first love before he moved over to Axe the Tax all the time. His first love was housing and how it's impossible to get a house, and he had all these plans for housing, and then that attracted quite a lot of young people to his flag, and then the data started to really show that switch, and it also happened in BC where quite a lot of young people moved over to the BC Conservatives. So there's definitely that switch taking place, and I'm not convinced myself that Karina Gold is she has the charisma or whatever it is, the leadership quality to bring young people back to the Liberals. I mean, you look at those pictures of Mark Carney in Kelowna, and then that other one, which I think was in Winnipeg or something, wasn't it, that one? And you just look at the crowd, like the average age seems to be about 67 or something, I would say, maybe a little bit older than that. That's kind of increasingly borne out in the data as well. That's becoming the Liberals' kind of constituency now, older people, pensioners, people that want to retain the equity in their homes.
And then this one is just the Liberals. This is Anita Anand. She's already declared that she's not going to run, but she's out there helping Talib with his re-election. So it looks like the Liberals are gearing up just in general for an election themselves. Like they're, like if Anita Anand is out there in BC with Talib to get his campaign going, so that must mean they're getting ready for an election as well.
Interesting jacket choice he's got on there. Bomber jacket, shiny bomber jacket. I didn't think that was Liberal style. But yeah, I mean, I think they've also got a bit of wind in their sails now, haven't they? A few polls. King Carney romping home. I think they're starting to actually be a little bit excited now and a little bit confident.
And maybe that's why Jagmeet is starting to make noise now about an election because, because it just wasn't 2 weeks ago where he was saying that he was going to give them some time. And I think he might realize now that they don't want the time. They're going to want an election. So now he has to, play that card where he was the one that was going to force the election.
Yeah. Well, it's all about appearances, isn't it? Oh, a lot of the time it's about appearances, and you don't want to look like a loser. You don't want your first thing that happens to you in politics as as the prime minister and a party leader to be a loss. You want to look strong, don't you? So, yep, I think it's coming. And the NDP, they'll be worried because they stand to lose seats to the Liberals, don't they? Ultimately.
Yeah, the polls definitely show that like a lot of the losses or gains for the Liberals is coming out of the NDP. Ruby Dalla, the other, I guess the real outsider in the Liberal leadership race. She's probably got a better social media campaign than most, but I don't see her with a lot of town halls and that stuff. Again, she's not getting a lot of press. And she's definitely doesn't sound like, like a lot of her policies are liberal.
She is the unexpected one, isn't she? She's the mystery candidate.
We shall see who coughs up the money here on Monday, because there's more money due. And she paid that. I mean, so they're in for a penny in for a pound, right? So, and this is a local MP, Dan Elbis, posting on Jagmeet. The NDP literally did everything they possibly could to help keep the Liberals in power. Now they're saying that it's going to be an election, right? So because because Jagmeet's saying that they're turning this political crisis in a benefit for them.
How dare they?
Yeah. And then this is something that was put together by a person that has this out there, and she's just putting together this clip of Mark Carney. We're going to play the clip and then we can talk about it.
Our Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, our Finance Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, Public Safety Minister, David McGuinty, Industry Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, and all the ministers. There's a huge Team Canada effort going on. They keep me informed kindly. I provide some perspective on that, and particularly with respect to where we go from here.
Huh, that's kind of weird, isn't it? To have an unelected guy be consulting with and being asked for advice about official Canadian government business. Yeah, of course, that really didn't look good.
Last point, obviously, I'm running to be Liberal leader. I am not currently part of those negotiations. They keep me informed kindly. I provide some perspective on that. We have a great...
So there you go. Two different approaches, or two different messages from Mark Carney on access to that information, or access to those MPs that are doing the negotiations.
I'd also just take this opportunity to have a go at the sort of media landscape in Canada, and the fact that random people on Twitter like this have such huge followings, while actual journalists and proper media outlets just sort of become desiccated and die in the background. One of the problems there is she's completely obviously wrong, and that's a very, very stupid thing to say, that an unelected person is giving advice to the government, and that's unusual. That's not even remotely unusual. That's how every government in the world throughout the history of the world has operated. I mean, surely even like people in elementary school know that. Is that just me? Am I being silly there for being like hot and bothered about that? Obviously, unelected people provide advice to the government. I mean,
well, he
was
a consultant as well. He pointed that out a number of newscasts ago, that he was actually working with the Liberal Party for quite a while as an economic consultant. And then, but you know, that kind of goes against where he's saying that he's an outsider when he was clearly providing advice all the way along.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a partisan political point, isn't it? Whereas the point that she made there was that it's weird that somebody unelected would provide advice to the elected government. That's not even slightly weird. That's like perfectly normal, been happening since the dawn of time.
Okay, let's move on to the big news out of Washington there. Donald Trump says he is working on a peace deal, and he's been talking with Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Zelensky of the Ukraine. And it sounds, according to him, progress is good, and you know, maybe they're going to get a ceasefire soon.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's going to do America's reputation any good. If it's a good one, if it's a good deal for the Russians, I think America's reputation will be even lower than it is now, I would say. So that would be a little bit crazy, especially, you know, all the despicable deeds of Mr. Putin there being rewarded with. I mean, people look at it on the map and they just see like a strip of land, and they don't really understand it. I don't think they don't think much beyond that. But that strip of land is basically the best part of Ukraine. That's where a lot of their black soil is, which is like the most fertile soil in the world. And they also have like other minerals and natural resources there, as well as access to the Black Sea. It's like really, really good land. So Putin would be quite gratified if he were to you know, succeed in obtaining that.
I think one of the things Zelensky said, because Trump asked for the critical minerals in exchange for all the money they've given him, and he says, you can have them, they're over there.
Yeah, the Russians control them. No, I mean, it would be a hell of a coup for the Russians if they did acquire all that territory, because it also protects Crimea, that the peninsula that they stole in 2014, such a long time ago now, 11 years ago that they annexed that bit of land. But they were very exposed there, because they didn't have a land bridge. And it was on the other side of just off that little peninsula was Ukrainian territory. And I think they also controlled the water supply or something like that, went down into Crimea. So they were really upset about that. So even though it seems to have cost them like several 100,000 dead and wounded, I feel like the Russians would actually be quite pleased with that outcome, or at least Putin would be.
There's
And that obviously wouldn't be a good thing for America, because it's the Americans that, the Americans precipitated this war in many ways with their desire to expand NATO and to constantly put obstacles up in the place of Russia.
Yeah. Trump's family has said that one of his legacies that he does want is to be a peacemaker. And two of his big promises in the election were to end the Hamas hostage thing and then to end the Ukraine war. And just talking about the Hamas hostage thing, that looked like that deal was going sideways because Hamas was reneging on release of hostages. And then Trump issued that ultimatum if they don't have the hostages back by, I think it's Saturday noon, I can't remember the exact time, that all hell would break loose. And it sounds like they're going to release the hostages now in the agreed upon timeline. So
that was a little bit cringe-inducing, that, wasn't it? Because he didn't actually make that ultimatum. He just said, "This is what I would do."
Yeah,
and then
he was
a
just
couple of
giving
days later,
Israel
Netanyahu
permission to go
said
ahead.
exactly that.
Yeah. And then the Ukraine war, I mean, that was part of his promise that he would end that war. He said he would end it before he took office. And so he's been now in office for, almost a month now. He's 7 days shy of a month here.
Yeah, and he didn't do it. One of many, many things that he won't do that he said he will.
Hey, if he ends that war in a month, I'll give him the grace period on that. I mean, because again, how many young men and women have died in this war already? I mean, if it's your children dying in that war, I'm sure. And if it's, I know what you're saying politically, but I mean, the human loss is crazy. I did an interview with the person that runs the Friends of Kiev here in Kelowna, and he said there's no young people in Kiev right now. They're all either dead or at the front lines there. So how many
Or they escaped.
Yeah, or they skipped. But and if you skip there, they basically take all your land and all your money away from you. Everything you've owned is gone if you dodge the draft there, right? And the Americans made them lower that age to 18. Biden, before he left, he made Zelensky lower that age to get more young people at the front lines.
I mean, it's particularly grim, in my opinion, what we're discussing here, like the death and maiming of young people, because in the context of Ukraine and Russia, these two countries have some of the worst birth rates in the world and have had some of the worst birth rates in the world for a long, long, long time. Decades, I think, actually, for both of them. And these are two countries that are kind of, it's no exaggeration to say that intellectuals in these countries are scared that the Russian ethnicity and the Ukrainian ethnicity will vanish from the face of the world. That's how worried they are, that there just are not enough people. And obviously, both of these countries as well suffer from massive immigration. Like when Putin invaded Ukraine, there was like 1 million people or something, most of them young, just got out of the country. They just didn't want to be there anymore. And obviously, God knows how many Ukrainians have left. I mean, it must be over 1 million to seek refuge or just to get out of there. So it's especially bad because when you look at other wars, like you look at the First World War, for example, the countries that fought those wars had pretty healthy birth rates. So they actually had young people, and they had young people that were going to replace the ones that died. But in this horrible war, the young people that die aren't being replaced. They're so precious in their respective demographies, and they're not going to be replaced. I mean, it's such a catastrophe. It's just like unfathomable how bad this is.
It's tough to get the real numbers, but I mean, Donald Trump has thrown out numbers like 1.5 million between the two sides, and he said it's just basically a field out there that these mountains of dead bodies are laying everywhere, and you know what I mean? Like, again, how many young people have to give up their lives because of like basically a proxy war, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, lots and lots of observers, and including people very high up in the United States military intelligence complex have said that this is transparently and obviously a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Lots of evidence to support that. Wasn't a lot of efforts made really to compromise, and yeah, that's what makes it especially kind of ironic and a little bit bitter, I think, for Donald Trump to come out and say, "Oh, this is all for you, Europe. Like we're doing all this for you."
Yeah.
That's completely untrue. That's
But
absolutely false. The Europeans did not want this war, and they would have compromised if they were in charge of things.
And they were working on a peace deal there, Zelensky and Putin, and then it was kiboshed by Biden about a year ago. So he's the one that didn't want the peace deal at that time.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson did a couple of years before that as well. Very slavish to the Americans, Boris Johnson, and he did it, and is reckoned to have done it at least in part, if not mostly, for the Americans, because the Americans, a lot of the senior American officials in the Biden administration even said this very they're not hiding it at all. They came out and said, "Look, Russia is a strategic enemy, or whatever they call them, opponent or challenge or something like that to the United States. They do a lot of bad things. They're making trouble in the Arctic, etc., etc. If we can inflict catastrophic damage to their military and their economy without losing a single soldier, then that's a bonus. That's a good thing for the United States." They actually came out and said those words, like pretty senior people. And I think that's how they look at it. They think, right, we've weakened Russia now, immensely weakened Russia. They've lost huge amounts of, material, aircraft, soldiers, equipment. Their economy's in the dumps. They've lost loads of trading relationships with Europe and other parts of the world. Their reputation is absolute dirt now. And the Americans look at that and say, all right, that's good. That only cost us $100 billion or whatever they spent. So, I mean, that's extremely cynical, but that is how a lot of people look at it in the United States. It's actually kind of gruesome, isn't it? But that's geopolitics for you.
And Trump tariffs, that should be his name. With more tariffs, he's saying, he just seems to be this slamming Canada with these tariffs on a daily basis. And it's just, again, it's he's got a string that he's whipping it around, and we're the crazy cats chasing it around. And again, we don't have a leader that can really speak out to it. We have a bunch of people speaking, and it's definitely, in my mind, a reason to have an election and have a real leader, whether that's Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre or Jagmeet Singh or whoever. We definitely need somebody that can represent Canada.
Maybe it could be the Bloc as well. Maybe they could form a government. I'm sure they would be good.
They look
good
right now
custodians of Canada.
They might be forming the official opposition, which is they haven't done that for a while.
That would be a little bit testy, wouldn't it? That'd be a bit difficult. I'd say for these reciprocal tariffs, though, I mean, actually, to get it out of the way first, Quebec, they wouldn't like it too much, would they? Because some of the highest tariffs that Canada has that aren't reciprocated, like with America, is dairy, and that's their the Quebec dairy mafia. They're not going to like that, are they? If the Americans put massive tariffs, but I don't really know. I don't think that there's all that much of a trade there anyway. I think it's mostly internal, isn't it? But the thing with these reciprocal tariffs is they're going to hurt countries like India, which is an interesting one because Modi's just been in the US. India is a very protectionist economy, and it always has been, really. And they put massive tariffs on everyone, really, and then expect to go out into the world and trade with the world. So they're going to be on the wrong end of a lot of tariffs, I would say. And obviously the Europeans just, being kicked while they're down, they must be absolutely devastated, the Europeans. It's just one punch after another from Donald Trump.
Yeah, the year of 2025 is going to be known as the year of tariffs, I'm sure, because it sure started off with that, right? So, but let's move on to DOGE. So they're having a hearing today on the DOGE subcommittee is meeting so that they can talk about it. And this is a clip here from that subcommittee.
How much money do you calculate is wasted due to waste, fraud, and abuse in the entitlement programs each year?
Yeah, my number right now between federal, state, and local government is you can save $1 trillion a year by simply putting in front-end identity verification, eliminating self-certification, and monitoring the back end of the programs that are providing the benefits. Those three things.
How much?
So there you go. I mean, I think, like there's a lot of noise out there about, anger against this Doge thing. But I mean, taxpayers work really, really hard for the money that then the government takes, and the government seems to want to take more and more every year, especially in Canada here. A lot of people are paying, after you add in the GST, HSTs, and all the other taxes, that you're paying over, 60% of your earnings into taxes. And then for the government to go out and spend them without accountability and transparency, and we've seen this here in Canada too, is that app we mentioned earlier, the ArriveCan app, at $60 million, which most people say should have cost like $60,000. And there's, the reason they prorogue government, again, I'll let you say that.
The reason they prorogued was for to elect a new leader, because they thought it would increase their chances.
But the government was deadlocked already because they wouldn't release the paperwork for the green fund there. That was
that was put forward as a justification. Yeah,
over $200 million that they won't release documents for, like where it was spent and who got it. And there's allegations that like the environment minister, his companies, was taking that.
Yeah, but it's a very good point though. There's a general fatigue. I think there's like a taxpayer fatigue that's across the Western world, probably even beyond the Western world, I would say. But certainly in the West, there's this exhaustion from taxpayers. They are so sick of taxes going up as incomes remain stagnant in most parts of the Western world. Obviously, that's not quite true in the US, but in Canada and parts of Europe and Japan, even if you want to call that the West, they've had stagnant incomes for so long, and yet taxes go up. Partly that's due to demographics, because there are more old people and fewer young people. So that means that the money has to come from somewhere to look after the old people, pay for their healthcare and so on. But there's a resentment, I think, of the fact that lots of young people as well, in the prime of their lives, they're paying like 50% of their income on tax, and they don't even earn very much, and they don't feel like they get anything particularly in return for it, or anything to justify that level of taxation. So then when they see these absolutely ridiculous government schemes, these totally frivolous projects that in some cases cost even like billions of dollars, you can see why something like Doge would be as popular as it is, can't you? I mean, it's not complicated, even though people are trying to like present it as a conspiracy or something like that. I mean, maybe it is, but I think there's also a lot of like authentic fury among taxpayers. They are sick of paying so much tax and not getting a lot in return.
I mean, it's crazy. Like, there were so many scandals here in Canada, especially with regard to money, that the Jagmeet Singh blocked investigation into, way back to the We Charity, that $500 million check, and then the ArriveCan app, and just, I mean, you could go on and on. In this latest one, over $200 million in this green fund that there's allegations that it went to, the environment minister's companies, but nobody gets to know. And, like there was times when Chrystia Freeland was asked, where the $1 billion went, and she doesn't know the answer. And, some of the things that Elon Musk says he's turning up is that the payments in the treasury there, they don't have a description on there, and sometimes they don't even have a name. And that's, obviously that seems odd, right? Like you're sending millions of dollars to people without filling out where it's going.
Yeah, this is like when people refer to the concept of the deep state. I think a lot of the time this is the sort of thing they mean, don't they? It's like bureaucratic mischief, and there are many examples of that. And I think, in the old days, you would have these kind of like house cleaning exercises from time to time, but in the bureaucracy, I mean, but it hasn't happened in an age, really, has it? Hasn't it?
Yeah.
Certainly
Well, they
in the
tried
US,
it.
it hasn't happened in a very long time.
Obama tried it. I think Clinton tried it, and it's just very, very hard for them they're just mired in the bureaucracy, and that's part of the thing, is that they make it so difficult. And I'm an accountant. I used to do audits, and they make it so difficult for you that you kind of give up. Whereas, like I think Elon Musk is a very focused kind of guy, and he's using software engineers, and they're using the AI and software to kind of dig this stuff out, and it's just spitting out the results to them. And it's being done with speed. I listened to a speech from Elon Musk, and he was speaking in remotely in Dubai yesterday, and they were talking about Doge, and you know, I'd advise people to go listen to that, because it seems like a lot of countries around the world now are asking for this similar type thing, because, you know, like, tax dollars should be used efficiently. And I mean, you have to use your money efficiently, don't you, every day? So why wouldn't you want accountability and transparency from your government that takes your money and spends it?
Yeah, and I mean, especially when you can't forget the sort of economic circumstances of many people in this country with, you know, people unable to afford food and like really basic stuff. It becomes harder and harder to justify expensive projects that don't represent obvious value for money or the public interest. It's just, I think that's just to be expected, isn't it? And I think in periods of retrenchment in the past and periods of like economic difficulty, governments would respond pretty quickly and trim down themselves. But that hasn't happened this time around, like the post-COVID economic misery. Instead, it's been the opposite. It's
Yeah,
been an increase in government spending.
I think that the reason they've been able to get away with it is that they pull out a political divisive tactic and then get people to attack each other based on liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican, instead of, like, you know, like, why don't we look at the real issue here? Like, we're spending money on stuff that we shouldn't be spending money on, but they turn it into something else. And it's an attack on politics and on the person, right? I mean, and it's both sides tend to want to attack the people, and we've seen these attacks, and including right now, you know, Chrystia Freeland, one of her attack points is to go after Elon Musk, because it's a popular thing to do right now, because he's, you know, he's definitely stuck his paw into the beehive and is stirring things up. So he's a lightning rod for hate. So she's trying to jump on it and saying she's going to add, you know, like 100% tariffs to Teslas. Clearly one of the best EVs, and they're talking about green stuff all the time, and how that, you know, like, they want to have a greener for the last 10 years, and they're attacking a company that is probably leading the charge in environmental change. It doesn't make any sense.
I think as well that's like that's what in the UK, in the British context, I would refer to as America brain, which is where a lot of people are just so they're so enslaved by American ideas and the American political discourse that they just come out with American talking points without even realizing that that's what they're doing. And I feel like maybe that's what Chrystia Freeland's doing a little bit there, because obviously she's very plugged into the US scene, as most of our politicians are in Canada. And if you look on the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, Huffington Post, any of the sort of left liberal outlets in the US, you'll see that pretty much their number one target right now is Elon Musk. And I think I would be shocked if Chrystia Freeland wasn't an avid reader of the New York Times and, you know, watcher of MSNBC and all the rest of it down in the US. So I feel like maybe she's got America brain, and she thinks that Elon Musk, because he's the big sort of bête noire down there, that would apply up here. I think to an extent that's true, though. I think Elon Musk, as I've said this before, I think he's extremely unpopular in Canada, but I'm not sure how relevant that really is to Canada. I mean, he's part of the US government. You know, he's a completely American operator. He's not, even though he has Canadian citizenship, he doesn't have anything to do with Canada. He doesn't really affect Canada in any way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I noticed in all these different, you know, when they pick a person to hate, there must be a website you go to, and you figure out who you're supposed to hate today, and then this machine gets together, and they start, you know, like, throwing slag at this person, and you know, and it seems like it's concerted, and and I ask the people sometimes why they dislike this person or that, and ask them for their logic, and it falls apart in like 2 seconds, because they're not even sure why they hate this person. They were just told that they must hate this person. Rommel's ahead of us there. That's okay. We can move on to that one, though. Rommel put up, looks like RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr., has been confirmed as the health secretary in the United States. A controversial pick for sure for the Trump administration, because there's a lot of things that RFK wants to see changed as far as health standards go. And you know, again, he's one that a lot of people, even in Canada, dislike for some strange reason. That, you know, like, if you look at their obesity rates down there, you look at autism rates down there, I mean, shouldn't we stop putting dyes in our foods? I mean, I've made a change myself. Like 6-7 years ago, I've lost 50 pounds, kept it off just by changing my eating habits and stop eating basically a lot of processed foods. And you stop eating a lot of sugar and wheat and processed foods, and it's amazing what you can do for your health. I mean, I look younger now today than I did 15 years ago, and that's just the food. And RFK looks like, and he's 74 and he's ripped.
It's all of that. It's all those turkeys that he cooks in massive vats of boiling oil or whatever. No, it's tallow, isn't it? Tallow, like he
Yeah.
puts it in fat. Yeah, I mean he's obviously a weirdo. I mean, it's not, even if you like him, I think you have to admit that he's an oddball. He's a crank, isn't he? And he's a weird dude in so many ways. It's like so much about this guy is weird, and he
So
says a lot of things that are just completely against the grain of the medical establishment, particularly in the public health establishment and authorities. Um, so obviously, like to me at least, it's obvious why it would be controversial, and I get that. But it's also to me obvious why it would be popular, and that's because he is against the status quo, and the status quo has led to what you've just discussed: obesity and sickness and misery, and not just
let's
America, but Canada and other countries that go along with these principles. So you can see why he's unpopular, but you can see why he's popular as well, I think.
let's take a moment to recognize Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is from one of the most famous Democratic families in the United States. And he was basically treated really badly because he tried to run for the Democratic ticket for the presidency, and they basically pulled him off the ballot and all this stuff. And he's still a Democrat. And here's Donald Trump welcoming in him to the Republican Party. Well, he's not even in the party. He's still I think he's registered as an independent now.
Yeah, he's an independent now.
And then the other one that we should talk about is Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed yesterday as well, another controversial Democrat that ran for, again, a failed Democratic presidential nominee. She was basically then called by Hillary Clinton as an operative for the Russians and then put on the terror watch list.
That's yeah, because she went to meet Bashar al-Assad, didn't she, in Syria, and I think that's when they started to really turn up the attacks. But I think it's the same for her as it is with Robert Kennedy, like except instead of health, it's the American sort of like military-industrial complex and American foreign conflicts. She is a former soldier, obviously, and so she speaks from experience a lot of the time. She speaks about how
actually still in the reserve, yeah.
Yeah, she's still a reservist. I don't know if she's likely to be called up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's actually been in uniform. I think she did a tour of Iraq or something like that, didn't she?
She did.
So she's been out
tours,
there. Yeah, so she's like actually quite a common thing when you speak to veterans. It's quite common for them to be pretty anti-war. A lot of people, I don't think, who haven't spoken to veterans don't realize that. But when you speak to them, a lot of the time they don't like war, and they look at the wars that they fought in as being ridiculous a lot of the times. And she's kind of come in from that environment, and she's completely opposed to the military and intelligence status quo in the United States, which is to often engage in wars that are retrospectively looked upon as stupid and wasteful, like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and so on, and like meddling in other countries' business. She's very much rejects the status quo. And you can see, again, like with RFK, see why she's popular, because the status quo isn't exactly doing great things for the United States. It's led to quite a lot of dead soldiers and paralyzed soldiers, and it's led to a lot of misery. I mean, can anybody say that the Iraq War has benefited the United States or benefited anybody except Iran? I don't think so. It was a complete disaster.
There was a few Americans that made a lot of money off of it, for sure.
Yeah, and a few Iraqis and others. But I mean, the bottom line is, anyway, you can see why she's popular. And then I guess you can also see why she's unpopular, because she does say a lot of things that really go against the status quo and what people are used to. She says a lot of things that shock people about, like, Russia and other countries that Americans have been, told by their leaders for a long time are their enemies, their bitter enemies that try and subvert their democracy and want to conquer the world and all the rest of it. But Tulsi doesn't buy into that, and that explains, I think, her popularity and her unpopularity.
Yeah, so somebody mentioned in the comments here about Elon Musk saying he's amazing. So I watched that conference in Dubai there, and they recognize it, and as do many people, that he is probably the most influential person in our time. He runs several companies that are all leading companies in leading industries, including SpaceX, Starlink, which is part of SpaceX, Tesla, in energy, Tesla in vehicles, autonomy and robotics with Optimus, the Boring Company. They just did a deal in Dubai, actually. They're going to put a loop down there in Dubai like they have in Vegas, so that the Boring Company is doing the things. He's also working with Neuralink, which is Neuralink is going to help blind people see and quadriplegics walk again. I mean, those are pretty impressive companies, and yet, you know, we've vilified him for different reasons here in Canada, and they don't make a lot of sense other than for some political points. If you look at what he's done for the world, and then look at what reason that you've been convinced that he's the public enemy number one, and maybe have a little reflection as to what's going on.
I would say a big part of it, though, is what he says on Twitter, and has said on Twitter over the last couple of years, because he's only been it's been a relatively short period of controversial tweeting from him, hasn't it? But I think that's what upsets a lot of people, like his position on transgenderism and sort of movements associated with transgenderism, his position on you know, the certain parties in Europe, like Alternative for Deutschland, which some people consider to be a far-right party. He's quite big on them. You know, he said a lot of things like that, and I think for a lot of people, especially young people, that's it, isn't it? That's enough. It's like, okay, he's on the other team. Like, I hate him because he's done this one thing, and they don't want to. You know, that's the life in the internet age is kind of like that, isn't it? It's like you haven't got time to investigate a person's like all their principles and actions. So it's like, okay, he said this thing, I disagree with that, so he's off.
It's the same argument I have with lots of people that, you know, on climate change. And I said, have you watched the master plan from Tesla, the master plan 3? And it tells you how we get past climate change. And most people that are screaming about climate change won't even watch that. And there's a plan, like a legitimate plan, that talks about how we move away from, you know, the damaging of you know, carbon emissions. And yet they won't watch it. And it's a real solution. So it just puzzles the heck out of me. Let's move on to markets, though. Gold's still going. Looks like it wants to challenge that $3,000 mark. There's a year-to-date chart there. Gold has made that move up. And you can go back and watch all of our previous shows. We do this Monday through Friday. We're about an hour usually when we talk about it. We always talk about the markets. We always talk about gold. Friend of the show, gold, right?
We're real gold bugs.
Friend of the show. Gold tells you what's going on in the world, right? Like if you just look at different things, gold tells you the political stability in the world for sure. And that's a big component of what gold tells you. Gold is the canary in the coal mine. Bitcoin.
The canary in the gold mine, yeah.
There you go. Crypto, Bitcoin. Again, kind of like building that base there, right? So building that shoulder down there. So again, if you look at that head and shoulders type thing, that looks like, you know, like once it finds a catalyst, the movement is up again. The wind in the sails of Bitcoin. So, I mean, if you flip that, I mean, if you're a technical analyst, you'd flip that, and that looks like that would be probably 120. Like it might be playing with 120, 125,000 next time. Kathy Wood of ARK Invest is calling for $1.5 million on the target for Bitcoin. Of course, a lot of these analysts call for extreme targets, and that's what makes you want to buy it. But definitely a lot of like wind in the sails, including in Vancouver here. The mayor of Vancouver wants to make Vancouver the Bitcoin capital of Canada. I don't know what that means, though, because not a lot of merchants are taking Bitcoin. That's one of the things that's missing, though, is the transactional part of it. A lot of people buy it and then they just sit on it like an investment, right? Or as speculation, whatever they look at it as. The dollar. Canadian dollar, look at that, above 70 cents. You know, the dollar saying that it's not too worried about tariffs. Look at that, eh? The dollar not buying in to the latest tariff Trump scares.
It's creeping up.
Yeah, the dollar's saying, because again, if we get an election and we get a leader that really promotes the natural wealth beneath our feet, that dollar is going to bounce like hard, and you'll see an amazing bounce on that dollar. If we get more of the same in this, if we get nailed with tariffs and all this stuff, a dollar, and if we get a government that is anti-investment in our resources, you're going to see a negative. You could be looking at 60 cents. So there you go. And if that doesn't matter to you, then hey, there you go.
You must have a lot of gold if that doesn't matter to you.
There you go. In our AI segment, Grok now has image editing, and I tried it this morning and it works. So you can actually get it to generate you an image of, say, of a cat, and then you say you want the cat to have, like, make the cat black or whatever. You can, edit the image that you've created, and you can make, like, different things. I played with it a bit this morning, so there you go. And then according to, again, nope, not yet. So again, according to the presentation that Elon Musk made in Dubai yesterday, there's another version of Grok 3 is coming out here in a week or two, and he said you're going to be blown away with what Grok 3 can do. It now has the largest compute power when that Colossus computer system that he built in Texas. So again, Elon Musk doing things in record time. Most people, even the Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, said like nobody could have built that thing in days. What it would have taken years for most people to build, I think he built it in like 17 days. So there you go. Doing things.
There's a viral tweet going around as well, isn't there, of a guy that says that he worked on Grok 3, on the he was on the AI team or whatever, and he was saying he's been fired because he posted his estimated like ranking of the AIs, and he put ChatGPT ahead of Grok, and he says he was fired for it, or he said he was fired just for mentioning the existence of Grok 3, but I find that a bit odd because that was announced ages ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Lots of times, a lot of those things are not true. Like there's a lot of stuff out there too with like these anti-Tesla things too, where people put out there that I think there was one that Tesla crashed and the brakes didn't work and stuff like that. But then they sued Tesla and they ended up. Yeah. So again, we got the Uber guy here, the CEO of Uber, saying because a lot of people are saying Uber might fall because if Tesla's robotaxi takes over. He's saying no. It's there's 150,000 drivers who are already driving Teslas, and actually that would help, and it would be actually boost Uber. And Uber's been up the last few days, so Uber rising. In our EV segment, Porsche in trouble, cuts 1,900 jobs in Germany as EV demand slumps for the Porsche EVs. And we got a little clip here from a friend, and we've interviewed him a few times with Edison Motors. And he used to be in Merritt, but now he's up in Northern thing. He's got a little rant here. Go ahead and play that clip.
Don't get me wrong, I love the United States. Every time I've been there, the people have been friendly, but this tariff seems like a stab in the back to the closest allies. But no, I'm not making my videos saying Canada needs to wake up because I'm trying to blow the United States off. I'm trying to point out how insane it has been for us to do business in Canada. And if it's insane for us to get through the rules and regulations, it's damn well insane for everybody else. Let me put it this way. We're still in a tent with no insulation in the middle of winter. It's 15 below zero right now because I can't build a stick frame shop with insulation because I can't get through the building permitting process to actually be allowing me to build something. Tried to buy the shop in Terrace, but after 6 to 8 months of trying, we couldn't even get a business permit to operate in the old Hayes truck manufacturing shop. Honestly, the over-regulation and over-taxation in Canada is insane right now. I think these tariffs should be a wake-up call to our government that we need to be more competitive for manufacturing and we shouldn't have to deal with this.
So that's Chance Barber. He used to be of Merritt. He's runs Edison Motors. He said he's stealing Tesla's ideas. And he's creating out of old logging trucks. One of his things is he's making electric logging trucks and using the regen stuff coming down a hill. When you take a logging truck, when you bring down a heavy load, obviously it regens a ton because there's a ton of braking involved. So that was Chance Barber out of, he's not in Merritt anymore, but I did a podcast with him, and Kent has interviewed him several times too. Trying to get
Well, he makes a
done.
point that a lot of people agree with about NIMBYism and red tape and all that.
Yeah, so that we added a new segment. If we don't have a meme, we have a beautiful image. This was sent to us from Adrian, his initials C, out of Vernon, and that's the full moon rising there in Vernon. Beautiful area that we live in. So we're going to try and highlight some of those big images there that show off our area. And with that said, that's our show for today. It's about an hour long, and I'm doing the Big White Snow Report next, so that'll be coming up in like a couple seconds. I'll be on with Chloe Cameron. Doing the Big White Snow Report. We ask you to subscribe, follow us, do all those things, and comment as usual. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.